Where all of us politicians have been learning about the perils of speaking without notes. And I'm just thinking, what is the thing I mustn't forget? Just like other politicians forgot one or two rather important things. And I think the things I mustn't forget to talk about are money, and capacity, and GP burnout. So I will talk about all of those. But I really have a very simple message. I fully understand the pressures on general practice. At the moment, I want to talk about those. And I also fully understand that the system has not responded in the way it needs to addressing those pressures. But I believe passionately one very simple thing. The NHS will not be sustainable unless we profoundly improve the support that we give to GPs to give the kind of care to their patients that they want to give and we need them to give. And we need, in the next 5 years, as the biggest single thing the NHS does, to transform that support. And that is at the heart of what I want to do. I've been Health Secretary now for just over 2 years. Some people say that it is the most difficult job in government. I feel it is the most secure job in government because no other MP wants to do it. But when I became Health Secretary, I decided in the 2.5 years that I had until the election, and I've said to David Cameron, I would like to stay. You may not want me to stay, but I would like to stay after the election if my party is successful. But I thought there were two really important things that I had to focus on. The first was in the wake of what happened at mid-staffs, to move to an NHS where our watchword was transparency and openness about standards, so that we never again have the appalling tragedy of a brilliant system in which totally appalling things happen in certain parts of it. And I have to say that I have been incredibly touched and incredibly impressed by the way the NHS has risen to the challenge of mid-staffs. And I think we are well on our way to putting that kind of tragedy behind us. Not to say that terrible things won't happen in the future, because in a huge system with 1.3 million people, seeing 3 million patients every fortnight, of course, occasionally things go wrong. But what we can put behind us is the terrible shame of the fact that those problems went on for 4 years without being stopped by the system, by anyone blowing the whistle, by whatever it was. So that was the first thing. But the second really big change that I think is totally fundamental is the transformation of out-of-hospital care. Now, Maureen's given me an injunction not to use the phrase out-of-hospital care. We can call it primary care and community care, or anyone who can think of a brilliant name for what I'm talking about, please tell me. But what I'm really talking about is this fundamental change that we need to move away from cure to prevention, to intervening earlier, more upstream, so that we stop people getting ill so that they don't need to go to hospital so much, and we end up giving them much better patient care. And that is where your role is so important. And I am very, very aware of how hard GPs are working. I'm very aware that we don't have enough GPs. I'm very aware of the madness of giving 10-minute appointments to people with complex comorbidities who need much, much longer, and many of you have told me that. Maureen's talked to me about that on many occasions. But I also know that we need a better partnership between GPs and the rest of the NHS if we're going to solve that problem. So I think there are probably 3 areas which are really critical to this, and I just want to talk about each of them briefly. The first is capacity. The second is investment, and the third is the contract. And if I just run through those. First of all, on capacity, we don't have enough GPs. The number of GPs has actually gone up by about 1,000 in the last 4 years. but we need to do much, much better if we are going to cope with the challenge of an aging population. One simple statistic that always sticks in my mind as we think about the next Parliament, by 2020, we'll have in England 1 million more people over the age of 70. 1 million more that we are having to cope with. That is a huge, huge jump in the pressure that the whole of the NHS, but particularly people at the front line of the NHS as you are going to have to face. So in the last year, announced a programme called Transforming Primary Care, which seeks to have another 10,000 professionals in the out-of-hospital sector, 5,000 GPs, 5,000 other frontline professionals, district nurses, community nurses, practice nurses, and so on. And we've been working very closely with Health Education England, who are now trying to increase the number of graduates from medical school to 3,250 going into general practice every year. We've been working with Maureen on a programme to boost the retention in the profession and to increase the number of returners. And I think we've got some good plans to increase those to 150 a year. And I think that is all positive. Taken together, we should have between 6,000 or 7,000 more GPs by the end of the next Parliament compared to the 2010 baseline. And I think that's an encouraging start. But I think we need to go further. And I think there is a big gap in our analysis about the workforce pressures on general practice. If you look at what happens in a hospital ward, and this was obviously something we gave a lot of thought to post-mid staffs with with a lot of the problems there occurring in short-staffed wards, particularly dementia and elderly care wards. If you look at what happens in hospitals, we do actually have a pretty scientific basis for knowing what the nurse-patient ratios should be in hospital wards. And we have tools that can be used by hospitals and nice guidelines as to what those ratios should be, whether it's 1:8 or 1:1 or 1:4, depending on the acuity of the patients. We don't have the equivalent for general practice. And so when I talk about 10,000 more people in the out-of-hospital care sector, when Labour talked about 8,000 more GPs last week, we all know we need more GPs. But if we're honest, there is an element of guesswork as to precisely how many we need. So today I can announce that I've asked Health Education England to do an independent study of what exactly we do need in terms of GP workforce, not just across the country, but area by area, because I think we need to know exactly where we are under-doctored, exactly where the pressures are, and by how much. I think that study needs to take into account workforce models. So Maureen and I had a very good trip to the United States, and we looked at the role of physician's assistants and medical assistants, and I think they do have a role in reducing pressure, but I think we should be scientific about this and actually understand to what extent they have a role and how they can make a difference. And we need to look at that and understand it and come up with a very detailed picture, which I want to be available next summer, after the election, but before the spending round is decided for the rest of the Parliament, so that we can actually understand what the need is in terms of workforce capacity in the primary care sector. And as part of that, and I really do welcome the discussion I had with RCGP leaders last night, as part of that we do need to change the tone of the discussion about general practice, because we need, if we're going to be recruiting more medical students into general practice, we need them to want to become GPs. We don't want a situation where we're prepared to fund the extra GPs, but they don't want to become GPs, and we end up with things getting worse and worse. And I look forward to engaging with you constructively to make sure that we do make people feel that general practice has a strong, exciting future at the heart of the improvements that we need to make to the NHS. So that's capacity. And now I want to talk about investment. It is wrong that we have invested progressively less as a proportion of total NHS spend in primary care and general practice. And I want to say that up front. If it is any comfort, you are not the only people who have suffered in this way. It is equally wrong that we have invested less in mental health provision, which is... Now, the reason that that has happened, and I stand here as a proud member of the government that took the very difficult decision in 2010 to protect the NHS budget, and in fact NHS spend has gone up in the last 4 years in real terms by about 4%, and I'm proud of that decision, although I was in a department that had much bigger cuts in order to fund that extra spend. But the reason for that is because we have made very important improvements in acute and secondary care over recent decades, but because we've had some very high-profile targets in the secondary care sector, particularly around A&E and waiting times targets, when the pressure has increased in the system as a whole, as it has because of the ageing population and other reasons, that has tended to draw resources to where the big high-profile targets are. And that is something we need to think about very hard going forward, because it is a false economy to take all our resources, or to continually take more of our resources downstream, so that we don't actually head off illnesses before they get worse, we don't prevent illnesses happening in the first place. And that, again, is part of the reason why I say to you with great confidence and great belief that transforming your role in the next 5 years is fundamental if we're going to make the NHS sustainable. So I think it is very important, both in absolute terms and as a proportion of total NHS spend, that we put more into out-of-hospital preventative care going forward. And indeed, I think that is the heart of the change that we need to make in the way the NHS works. Now, it has been very, very tough. Where you have essentially a flat budget, to increase funding in one sector means you have to take away funding for another. And that, when hospitals are under huge pressure, is a very big ask. But I have made some progress in my short time doing this job. So last year we had the extra £250 million, the £5 a head that came alongside the GP contract. When you add that to the £150 million that was freed up in the DES, there's £400 million available. We've had to help boost proactive care for the most vulnerable older people. We've had the Better Care Fund, which after working with the college, we have been able to, this is a nearly £4 billion fund which is getting the local NHS and local authorities to work together on the social care system, jointly pooling budgets, commissioning care, sharing medical records, and so on. And we have now established that, providing it's work that's additional to what you're contracted to do, this is a fund that GPs can access for additional services. And I think that is a serious amount of money. And then we've had the Prime Minister's announcement, both last year and this week, about a fund to help GPs offer evening and weekend appointments. I want to stress this is not a commitment that you will be able to see your own GP 24/7. GPs, just like politicians, need weekends, need holidays, need a break, and this is not that commitment. We've actually had a fantastically good response to the Prime Minister's challenge, 1,200 surgeries taking part in it. And what it is essentially funding to allow GPs to form federations so that people will be able to book evening and weekend appointments, maybe not at their own surgery, maybe at a neighbouring surgery, maybe not face-to-face, maybe by Skype or telephone. And they may or may not be speaking to their own GP, but what they will be doing is speaking to a doctor who can access their medical record. And I think this is something that will be fantastically good for patients, but also I think will help GPs and surgeries to work together. And so there is extra resourcing in that. But While we're talking about money, I also want to say something which I think a lot of you will agree with, but is a more difficult thing to say. And that is that it isn't just about money. If we continue to pour money into the same old system, we will in the end get the same old results. And actually, we need to look at the cultural change that we need within our NHS to rise to new challenges that we haven't had to face before. And I think the two cultural changes that really matter are improved personal care and also improved personal control for patients. So personal care, that means that wherever you go in the NHS, you're talking to someone who knows about you, your medical history, your allergies, your medication history. More than 40 people died last year in the NHS because they were given the wrong medicines, presumably because they were given medicines by someone who didn't have access to their medical history and didn't know what their allergies were. We need to eliminate that, and this is a very important step. But also, in an era where we're going to have, I think, 3 million people in a couple of years who have 3 or more comorbidities, those people need continuity of care, and they need to be talking to someone who knows about them. And that need for personal care is very important. But coupled with that is a move away from the doctors knows best culture to a patient knows best culture. Because I think in the end, if we're going to manage people with long-term conditions, we need to enroll their help in managing their condition, their enthusiasm. They need to feel they're in the driving seat for their own care plan. And that's a big change, which allowing people to access their medical records, which you're all helping to make possible, is going to make much easier. Let me talk about the contract. As I think you probably all know, I'm not a fan of the new GP or the GP contract structure that we have at the moment. I think that it makes it too much about money. I think we have a contractual structure where too many of the really important things that you need to do for patients and want to do for patients are linked to quite narrow financial targets. And I think that creates sometimes perverse behaviours. And I would like to see a structure, and I'd like to see us move towards a structure where you've got a much larger sum of money in the global sum in return for much greater transparency about patient outcomes. Because I think a much better way to improve results for patients, not just in general practice, but across the NHS, is by collecting and using data in a smart way that allows intelligent peer review. That, I think, is a far more powerful way of doing it than linking things to contractual targets. Now, I have tried to do that in the last 2 years. We've removed 40% of the QOF points, for example. We have reintroduced named GPs. This isn't the commitment that you will always see the same GP, but it is the commitment that there will always be a GP's name on every medical record. And I think that link between patient and doctor is a really, really important and profound change. I think many people here very bravely carried on with that personal responsibility, even though it was removed from the contract requirements in 2004, but it hasn't happened everywhere, and I personally think that it's extremely important. So some important changes to the contract, and going forward I would like to go further. Let me just look ahead. There are, we've got a general election coming up. There's going to be a big debate about the NHS, which I absolutely welcome because I think it's one of the most important things to voters. I think some things need to happen and some things don't need to happen. You will forgive me if in the run-up to an election I say that there are some things proposed by my political opponents that I profoundly don't think should happen, and I just want to say what they are. First of all, I think it would be a huge mistake to remove GPs from the commissioning process. I think we have had huge advances in the last couple of years from having GPs' voices around the top tables in CCGs. And of course it takes time for new structures to bed down. But I think we're seeing some really transformative innovation because of that clinical leadership in the commissioning process. We're seeing some fantastically better links between primary care, community care and acute care because of the involvement of clinicians. And far from wanting GPs to be taken out of that commissioning process, I would like them to have a much bigger role even than they have now. I would like the CCGs to move gradually to becoming accountable care organisations with capitated budgets. I'd like to see them having responsibility not just for commissioning secondary care, but working with NHS England to co-commission primary care, working with local authorities to co-commission social care, so that we have in each part of the country a group of people, clinically led, clinically experienced, people who are themselves talking to patients every day, who are making the decisions about how to deliver the best integrated, joined-up care. And I think it would be a great tragedy to lose that. I also think that it would be a big mistake to remove the independent status of GPs and turn them all into salaried employees. Now, many GPs are already salaried employees of their practice, and that is something different. But those practices have independence. And I just want to give you one example as to why that independence has been of huge benefit to the NHS. You very stubbornly and very bravely refused to really cooperate with Connecting for Health under the last government and set up your own GP records using EMIS and System 1. Thank goodness you did. We have fantastic medical records in the NHS, which are going to be the basis of shared records that are used throughout the system in the bottom-up way that we should have done from the start in terms of having electronic health records. But that's because you had that independence and freedom, and you were able to do what turned out to be absolutely the right thing for patients, and I don't think we should lose that. And finally, I think it would be a big mistake to force GPs to become employees of local hospitals as members of integrated care organisations. We all want integrated care, and there may well be some parts of the country where they have a brilliant integrated care model that is led by the local acute trust. But there may be other parts of the country where the integrated care model is led by local GPs. There may be other parts of the country where the integrated care is led by local authorities. And we need to allow those partnerships to develop in different ways, in different parts of the country. Because the truth is, there is no country in the world that has actually cracked integrated care. And it would be a huge mistake to choose one model and force it on everyone. That would feel quite like a reorganisation, which is not a popular thing to do. And I think that we need to have flexibility, but I think the corollary of flexibility is transparency of outcomes. If you have good data and transparency of outcomes, then it's much easier to give local areas the freedom to innovate, because we'll always be tracking what the results of that innovation are, and we're always able to step in if there are any problems. I've just got one final thing to say, which is, despite many challenges, I believe the NHS is actually doing very, very well. And I think it's really important that we remember the context of some fantastic achievements, even as our healthily free media talks about some of the problems. And I give two examples, which I think are really impressive. I think cancer is an area where we had some of the lowest survival rates in Western Europe 4 years ago. Thanks to your efforts, we are now sending for testing 1,000 more people every single day for cancer. And we're seeing the survival rates start to close the gap with some of the other countries in Western Europe, and that is a big step forward. I think dementia is another area where we're really turning the tide in terms of understanding about dementia. And GPs are helping to diagnose many more people with dementia, which means we're able to give better support than we have before. The Independent Commonwealth Fund said this year the NHS has become the top performing healthcare system in the world, better than America, better than France, better than Germany, better than Australia. And I think that's a really important point of context. I just want to make one last point. It is our tradition of general practice, our tradition of giving care to people near their homes, that is why I believe in this big challenge faced by healthcare systems all over the world. The NHS has all the right cards. I think we could do it better than virtually anywhere else. If you're in France or if you're in America and something goes wrong, your first instinct is to go to a specialist hospital. And so they are having to create the structures that will give continuity of care to vulnerable older people, people with complex long-term conditions. We have those structures. We just haven't used them. We just haven't exploited them. We just haven't made the most of what we already have. And that is why I think our tradition of general practice is one of the biggest assets for the NHS going forward. I just want to make sure we use it. Thank you very much.